Welcome, LA Progressive friends and family. Today, I am so delighted to have with me two friends, Allison and Marion, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But I will tell you that this past weekend, we spent the entire weekend together in Oakland at the National Gathering for Coming to the Table. And let me see if I can show you guys. I got this nifty bag as a result of attending Coming to the Table. And so I'm going to let Allison and Marion talk a little bit about what Coming to the Table is about and why we spent this weekend together. And if it's okay, I don't know which one of you wants to go first.
I'm deferring to Marion because Marion preceded me in our local group. So
Okay.
By about 3 months.
Okay, then go for it. And tell us about yourself, Marion.
My name is Marion Tango. And I was trying to figure out, I was going through my calendar, when did I actually start? But my calendar doesn't go back that far. So I think it was 2014, 2015. And I Coming to the Table is a national group that brings together descendants of enslavers and descendants of enslaved in this country to heal and work through the legacy of slavery. And it was started back in 2006, basically through one of the programs we have is linked Descendants. So some white descendants of slaveholders found some Black descendants through enslavement, both biologically connected and just connected through the history of slavery. I joined around 2015, and I came to it because I did my own genealogy. I had the narrative that my family gave me, which was, we're from the North, nothing to do with us, even though we go back to the beginning, the founders. And when I started doing my ancestry on ancestry.com, I very quickly found out that there was a lot more to my history than I realized. And it was devastating, overwhelming. And very soon after I was doing that, I stumbled upon a link for Coming to the Table, completely not related. I wasn't looking for it, but I found it. And there was a local group meeting about a mile from my house. So I was very fortunate to be able to step very easily into it, and I haven't left.
Great.
Now on the steering committee, as Allison was for a good chunk of time. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay, Allison, tell us about yourself and how you came to know about Coming to the Table.
So I'm Allison Thomas. I grew up in Los Angeles, but my family descends from colonial enslavers in colonial Virginia back to the 1640s. I don't think we've never found a Jamestown thing, but it might as well be that far back. So we had the similar kind of myths that Marion had. And when I was unpacking my family history, first I found a lot of first person accounts of enslavement, because I had an ancestor who, when he died in 1732, was the wealthiest man in Virginia. He was even called King Carter. And when he died, he had 300,000 acres of land and 781 enslaved people, but I was told he had 16 children and he gave them each a piece, and the wealth disappeared overnight, which is completely 100% counterfactual. He built a dynasty, and he very deliberately portioned out his wealth so that it would keep growing. And he had 60 grandchildren. So you start doing some math, and the exponential impact of the wealth he accumulated is huge. But that still feels like far ago, like long ago. It's easy to be distanced from it, especially when you grow up in California, I think. But the research that really stopped me in my tracks was when I discovered that he was also involved in the slave trade. And he didn't necessarily invest in ships, but when the British owned ships would pull up, they would pull up to his dock on the Rappahannock in Virginia, and he would go on those ships and broker the sales of those Negroes, as he called them. And he kept a diary of this. There's letters about it. He was always trying to get a better deal, higher commission. And is that he would tell us in his diary, he would just say sold 13 today. But then he would detail that exactly what he had for dinner, how many hours of sleep he got, how many times he got up in the middle of the night. And it was such an appalling look into the extreme racism around this, the quotidian nature of it to him, but he's talking about these human beings that he obviously doesn't recognize as human at all. And so you end up wrestling with this legacy of how do your ancestors behave in such an inhumane fashion to other people? It just is hard to understand. And so I had read Tom DeWolf's book, Inherit the Trade, which was his story of discovering he descended from the largest slave trading family in US history, who were in Rhode Island, the DeWolf family. And I thought, please, if there's a coming to the table group near me, I need to go. And so I went shortly after Marion. It was in early spring of 2015, I think. And meeting Marion, who shared the same legacy, and there were two others in the group. I always described it, I felt like they shared the same pain in the back of their eyeballs that I had, that we carry an extra weight with that legacy, and partly because we're struggling with it, I think.
Wow.
So that was the beginning for me.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell a little bit about my story. I came to Coming to the Table, I think it was about 5 years ago, that I was introduced to it by Marion. I was speaking at an event, and Marion was in attendance at this event, and I don't remember exactly what my talk was on, but generally when I'm asked to speak, usually if I'm asked to speak by a white person, it usually is because of something having to do with race. And the person who asked me to speak was a white person. So I'm imagining that I was talking about race. At the end of the presentation, Marion walked up to me and asked, had I ever heard of Coming to the Table? So I don't know what prompted you to invite me, Marion. Do you remember, or do you just invite everybody?
No, not everybody. And I usually try to get white people to come because I think we need it. But no, I was just really impressed. I know who you were speaking with, but I don't remember the topic. I just remember thinking, oh, I want to get to know you, and I think this would be something you'd be interested in.
Yeah, and you were right. It is something I'm interested in. Most of the people who are watching this, if they're not regular readers of the LA Progressive, they probably know that Dick and I are a husband and wife team, and Dick is white, and obviously I'm Black. And we've been married for more than 20 years. But in that 20-year period, I often say that I've become Blacker. Being married to a white man has made me Blacker because I have really searched high and low to try to gain a deeper understanding of the differences in our cultures. You know, there are many people who think, well, all we need to do is just become racially colorblind, and that just makes problems go away. Well, in fact, I know that that doesn't make problems go away. That's like saying, you discovered a few cancer cells, but if you just ignore them, everything will be fine. Well, so I really dug deep in terms of research and reading and trying to understand why we white people and Black people have such a different experience of race. And I came to the knowledge of a whole new terminology, like words like racializing, understanding that non-white people are racialized in ways that white people are not. So I want to talk a little bit about the conference. Um, Marion, you want to tell us a little bit about the conference and what you experienced there and what it was about?
Well, it was the first 5 years in person that we got to do, and it's the first time we've had it in Oakland on the West Coast, because Coming to the Table started on the East Coast at the Eastern Mennonite University back in 2006. So now it's co-sponsored by Our Joy, which is based in Oakland. And so we had, I think, around 100 people from all over the country. It was great to be in person again and to be able to hug people. We had some amazing speakers, Dion Ford, whose book is behind Allison there. Go back and get it. Awele was an amazing storyteller. We had a conference, a panel of youth talking about what they're doing in Oakland. So I love it because, you know, it makes me feel how big we really are, how many people are in this journey together who care, from different states all over the country, who, you know, find their own way of doing it, their own style, but we all have a shared value system, which, you know, can feel very isolating most of the time in our country to be on this path. A lot of white people just don't want to talk about it. And so it's just wonderful to be in a room of people where, you know, everybody's ready to talk about it, and you can bring up any subject you want and people are like, yeah, let's get into it. So I feel both jazzed up and inspired, but I also, you know, coming back from it, I feel the heaviness and the grief too. Like, you know, I had to kind of settle, my family had to put up with me, feeling anger, feeling sadness, not knowing where to put my energy, just feeling the overwhelming journey in front of us, but also bolstered by our shared commitment.
Yeah. Yeah. Allison, you want to talk a little bit about your experience this weekend?
Well, it was so amazing to be in person. There are so many people I'd met on Zoom that I'd never met in person. And, you know, 3D, it looks different. And that was great. So, and I felt that the connections, I thought I'd made all these great connections. We kept up doing so many things on Zoom during the pandemic. But it was, you went instantly deeper, and people were more emotional, more open, more vulnerable in person. And that was great. I found that the closing session on grassroots reparations on Sunday morning to be particularly powerful, because I am doing a lot of work in the area of reparations. And I had met the speaker, David Ragland, before, but I thought it was interesting to me, at least what I got out of it, is he was like, okay, yes, and we now understand what anti-racist means. It's an active stance. Anti-racism is really a verb, not a noun. But he was like, but reparations, to be a reparationist is one step beyond that. And it's looking out at our world in a non-extractive, post-colonial way. And I thought that really had a big impact on me, because I hadn't thought about it quite like that. You know, we have the California Reparations Task Force wrapping up its work here in California. So it's a particular focus, I think, for those of us here, and how we're going to support legislators trying to move those bills through. But he was talking about it on a personal level. Don't go to Starbucks because they're the leading gentrifiers of poor neighborhoods. I mean, I don't go to Starbucks anyway, but that was like another great reason. And it kind of shifted a mindset for me to look at things even more deeply. I had been focusing on my personal work to look at housing, you know, addressing homelessness or criminal justice reform or Black maternal health. But this was yet another level that looked at it in a much more systemic fashion, that really, it's still working its way through the pit of my stomach. I feel like physically I'm still processing what he was communicating, and I look forward to hearing more from him about all that. I think he's working on a book, and I think there's more to come in that arena.
Yes, that's so exciting to me, that he and that the group is really connecting issues like economic issues. I mean, we all talk about how race is a social construct. And I often say, yes, it is. It's a social construct. Scientists say it's not biological, but it was socially constructed for an economic reason. And I feel that unless we address the driving economic reasons for this social construction, we're not going to be able to deconstruct it. It's so interwoven with capitalism. In fact, Robin Kelley, who is a UCLA professor, he talks about racial capitalism and how the birth of capitalism coincided with the birth of slavery, and how the two have grown hand in hand. So when I talk about Dick and I and me becoming Blacker, this is one of the things that I learned, is this socially constructed for economic reasons. I would often talk about how Black people have been oppressed for 400 years. And one time early in our relationship, actually when we were still dating, Dick said, well, you weren't enslaved for 800 years. And I had to really think about, what was the 400-year period? So I went back and I started just doing my own research. It took me months to develop a set of charts that talks about racially based caste systems in the United States, both legal caste systems and extra legal, beginning with slavery, the legal imprisonment, torture, rape, and so on, the anti-miscegenation laws, vagrancy laws, slave codes, Black codes, convict leasing, apprenticeship, sharecropping, peonage, Jim Crow laws, racial cleansing. That's something that I learned about kind of recently. A Pulitzer Prize winning journalist by the name of Elliot Jaspin wrote a fantastic book called Buried in the Bitter Waters. And what he talks about is how entire Black communities were expelled from their homes and told, you better leave or you're going to die. And so, I mean, I have a long list that gives the ways in which Black people have been held down at the bottom rungs of the caste system, racial caste system, but have been held down specifically for economic reasons, even though those reasons have morphed and have become part of American culture. And there is hatred and there is prejudice. All of that is all mixed in. But at the heart, the central driving motivator was greed and money. So anyway, so I just had to get that off my chest.
Well, and I do think, to go to the racial cleansing issue, in LA in particular, since you are the LA progressive, we had Prop 13, which was basically a old white people tax write-off so that they could own their houses and defund public education all at the same time. And public education, they wanted to defund it because integration was going on and busing was going on. So, and we still labor under the burden of Prop 13 today, and it's incredibly unfair. And it locked into place our racially segregated city. And what people, in addition, don't know about LA, whenever you see an incorporated city, it usually means they didn't want to be part of Black LA. And so Beverly Hills, Glendale, Culver City, Burbank, and they often had racial covenants that went along with that. They were sundown towns, and people think these are such nice little communities that they're moving into, but the history was not at all nice.
And one of our local members spearheaded the movement to change Glendale from a sundown town, because these are still, a lot of them are still on the books. Right. I mean, not enforced, but they could be.
Well, when you say not enforcement, Marion, the thing that's so interesting to me is when I learned which towns were sundown towns, I kid you not, when I go through those towns, I get a vibe that says you are not welcome here. So even though maybe it's not enforced, it wouldn't surprise me if the police are a little extra vigilant in the way that they patrol. I personally, when I first came to California, for 1 year, I went to Lakewood High School. And at Lakewood High School, I got a job selling, when I was a high school student, I got a job selling encyclopedias. And so I would, leave school and be right in the Lakewood community, even though I didn't live in the Lakewood community, I was bused. But I'd leave a school and immediately start going door to door selling these encyclopedias. And a few times, the first time the police would just like slowly, rolling up on me and ask, what are you doing? Why are you here? And what are you doing? And I'm like this little 16-year-old girl. Why the hell are they bugging me? And then I found out later in life, about sundown towns. And even though it's I think it's still lightly enforced. and sometimes not so lightly.
Well, we had a member who used to talk about her discomfort if she was being picked up and they said, wait for me on this corner and I'll swing by and pick you up. If it was a white neighborhood and they didn't come on time, she would get increasingly uncomfortable because if too much time went by, someone would come up to her and say, why are you here?
That's right.
And sharing these kinds of stories is part of what's transformative about coming to the table, because I think about that story all the time. When I'm picking anybody up or feel it's like, I'm not going to make her feel uncomfortable on that street corner. I'm going to be early or something, because we have this horrible legacy and we spend a lot of time sharing stories and trying to understand our different life experiences. And I think that proximity to understand different people's life experiences helps us evolve to a different level.
Absolutely. I would say I called myself, a bleeding heart liberal growing up. I was very aware of some of the racial issues, but I still didn't feel comfortable having a conversation with a Black person about it. I was afraid I wouldn't know what to say. I'd say the wrong thing. I would create more distress. And coming to the table has really opened those pathways of communication. I understand things I could never have understood without hearing it from an African American voice. And so just the things we take for granted now, I can take for granted that I can have a conversation or understand things about sundown town that most white people just have no exposure to. We didn't learn it in school. We don't live in communities where it's talked about. Even if there's mixed race communities, there's still there's this unspoken rule, we don't go there. And so that's what I love about coming to the table. It creates a culture of connection and shared history.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm hoping that some of the things, one of the initiatives that I was introduced to this weekend when we went to the convening was that Coming to the Table has a subgroup working with reparations. And I don't know if we have a subgroup that's already established to address these banning of books. Because as you can tell, learning this history is so essential as we move forward toward healing. I don't think it's possible to heal if we ignore the past and don't understand how the legacy of the past continues in the present. I just don't know how we can heal.
And once you really understand the history, you can't help but be in favor of reparations because it's so clear. All the roots of these programs, where police came from, where guns came from, prison industrial complex, all these kinds of extensions of enslavement.
Yeah.
Well, and I gotta say, talking to some white people recently, there's the fear, what does that mean? What's going to be taken away from me? And this, I didn't have anything to do with this, but what the two things I keep trying to emphasize is it's the healing of a nation. It's a deep wound that we as a nation are built on, that we will all feel better when we heal it properly. And the fear of something being taken away, I keep saying, what have you missed out on because of this racial divide? The friendships and connections and inclusion. There's so much that we don't get to feel because of this wound. So I think it serves the white community as much, if not more, to lean into healing and repairing the atrocities that we did as a nation, not even
Yes,
as individuals, but as institutions.
that's right.
As educational institutions, government institutions, that we all will benefit from really getting to the deepest part of that wound and repairing it.
Yeah. One thing that I don't often hear talked about is an issue that Heather McGhee, she wrote a book called The Sum of Us. And what she talks about is how racism really impacted everybody. not just Black people. She talks about, she gives this talk, and she talks about the swimming pools in the South, the public swimming pools in the South, and how wonderful they were before government mandated desegregation. And once desegregation became the law of the land, those pools were filled with concrete or cement or whatever, so that nobody could use them. And that's a perfect example, because there are many sociologists that believe that but for racism, this country would probably have universal health care. We probably would have a living wage. So many of the things that have been pushed back using the false premise that, well, Black people, we don't want them to have this. One of my favorite books that really helped to enlighten me about how racism has impacted everyone is a book that was written by the late, great Lonnie Guinier and Gerald Torres. And the name of the book is The Miner's Canary: Enlisting Race, Resisting Power, Transforming Democracy. And in the book, what she talks about is how if we just paid attention to what goes on in the Black community, we would be given a bird's eye view into what is coming. So she contends that, like the canaries that alerted miners to a poisonous atmosphere, issues of race point to underlying problems in a democratic society that will ultimately affect everyone. And, you know, we saw that play out in 2008 when we had the big, huge bailout, you know, too big to fail, and the banks had to be bailed out. Well, Black people had been losing their homes to foreclosure in record numbers. And if a focus had been put on that at that time, it wouldn't have spread to the point where it almost caused an economic collapse of the country. But anyway, that's stuff that I learned. Basically, getting Blacker and publishing the LA Progressive. So when we went to the convening, one of the nice things I got is this book, which was given away to us, Race and Restorative Justice. Got a wonderful keychain. I just kind of really want to give a plug. I don't know if I have this upside down. A plug for coming to the table. For people who are interested in coming to the table, Tom DeWolf has been mentioned, but Tom DeWolf, who is the co-executive director, or he's executive director, he's a member of the family. And Allison, you mentioned his family being the largest slaveholder in the United States. But there was a book and a movie, documentary, Traces of the Trade. And so I actually knew about Tom DeWolf way before I knew about coming to the table. You guys, and either one of you want to talk a little bit about coming to the Traces of the Trade?
Well, there's a documentary and a book. So Tom's cousin did a documentary and invited all the DeWolf descendants from around the country. And I think about 40 to 60 showed up. And then they went to the family places in Rhode Island, but they also went to Cuba and to Africa together. And Tom's book traces his feelings about that journey and learning that family history. And it's very powerful, and how it's changed his life. I mean, he's co-executive director of Coming to the Table, and he has been for a long time, ever since I've been with the organization anyway.
Yeah.
So it's a transformative thing. And of course, we don't really talk much about slavery in New England. So the Rhode Island story, we think the largest, the biggest participants in the slave trade are in Charleston or New Orleans. And so there were a lot of aspects about that Rhode Island story that I think were very powerful. And then he wrote a second book with Sharon Morgan, who's one of my mentors. She runs Our Black Ancestry. Sharon and I did a talk together at the gathering. And he and Sharon took each other to their family spots. And that's gather at the table. And they fought and yelled at each other, stopped talking. I mean, it was not necessarily an easy ride. They spent weeks in a car driving around to visit their family places, but they kicked off a lot of that, or they did spend Thanksgiving with Renee Dixon, who's one of the founders of our local group, because Renee and Sharon are cousins, which is how I met Sharon. originally through Renee at the National Gathering in 2016. So I always loved that book, Gather at the Table. And again, it's playing out these relationships kind of in real time with them.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me about that documentary is how that experience of discovering that their family, were the oldest, and then the desire to learn more about it, it really split the family in two. There was a big portion of the family that just, they don't want to know about it. And then another side of the family that says, yeah, we need to learn more. Have either of you experienced that? How do your families deal with this? I mean, clearly you're very invested in this and you spend a lot of time with it. How do your friends and family, your white friends and family, feel about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I just want to just touch back on one of the things about Tom's book that I really love is how it's basically his journal, and you get to watch in real time his evolution. Like starting out with, what does this really have to do with me? And it's not, I don't get it, and you see him peel those layers back until he's just raw and so deeply attuning to his family history and feeling a sense of responsibility and a need to repair. And as Allison said, he's devoted his life to it ever since. I would say with my family, one part of it are bleeding heart liberals, but they still don't feel a personal responsibility to do anything about the past. It's more like, what can we do now in the future just to be good people? But they're not taking it as a personal responsibility. And then there's other parts of the family that just, are completely deaf and blind to all of it. They don't want to hear it. That's not the story they want to go by. And even people who start out by saying, oh, yeah, no, I want to hear about.
Uh-oh.
It's my dad's side of the family. And I'm sure because we moved to California, there's parts of the family I still haven't met, although we're gathering them up. And my dad's brothers are scientists. So I found if I presented the facts and I would just lay out facts, I tried to not have judgment. They knew I was anguished about it. And I still have that brought up to me because they're like, that's kind of how it was, Allison. I'm like, but why is that okay? And so I brought them along with me on this journey, and they've had different reactions at different times. And my dad's younger brother and his family all came to our reunion for the Black Descendants of Wens Island, which was a racially cleansed area that I did research on because our family enslaved quite a few of those people before the Civil War. And this next reunion, I now have my dad's older brother coming, my cousins from New Jersey, and these folks are all in their 80s or 90s. My father's passed away, but I stood there at the last reunion. I felt really good because we had 25% white people. And I thought that's great because they're here to be with us as we follow this path. We need our accomplices and allies. And they still say things that I just cringe, and I've got to kind of rewind the tape and walk through why what they're saying is kind of an unconsciously privileged or ignorant position. But it's fascinating to me that they are interested and able to go along on it. And I'm sure the ones who are not, I never hear from. But I don't have active resistors in my family. They kind of but now I'm hearing the stories that my grandparents would have been very upset about this. I never heard those stories from my dad, but I always sensed my grandparents. I mean, I knew they were racist, but I'm now hearing more stories about that generation and their racist behavior and the fights they got into with my dad's generation. So in that sense, I feel like I'm fortunate because if I was my dad doing this work, it would have been much more challenging, much.
Yeah, I should add, my 90-year-old mother did come with me to the 2016 National Gathering. So she's willing, and it's similar. It's like some things are said that are really problematic, but she's willing to sit and really unpack it with me.
Yeah.
So
You
I
know,
feel the programming on one hand to not see it, but the willingness to try.
yeah. You know, we oftentimes think of, well, this was so long ago, but I was 10 years old when my great grandmother died, and she was born in 1863. And she babysat me. So she was born before slavery was abolished. So I have a direct connection. Although she was not born in the United States, she's from Antigua, which is one of the Caribbean islands that the DeWolf family had their sugar plantations.
Wow.
So yeah, so that's another research project for me. But anyway, I want to wrap up because people don't like long videos, and and they like to spend more time cutting this, but we can do more. We can do another one at another time because we really do have a lot more that we can talk about. So as I wrap up, do you want to talk at all about any project that you're working on? You know, I know, Allison, that you're working on stuff, and I know that Marion, you have recently been certified. I don't know if you want to talk about any of that stuff, but you want to give us some update on what you're doing right now?
Sure. Well, yeah, what I just got certified in, I'm working with Thomas Hübl, who is a modern day mystic who's actually from Austria and has focused a lot on the aftermath of World War II, because his grandfather was a Nazi. But he's starting to come into the United States and really help learn more about our particular flavor of racism and genocide. And it's his work focuses on personal, collective, and ancestral trauma, and recognizing our interdependence and how we all feed each other, for better or worse, that we're not doing this alone, that we create fields of healing. And I'm deep in that work and wanting to bring a practice group to our national group so that we can start getting into deeper conversation with a feeling of safety and connection.
Wonderful. And I have to admit that I have been a beneficiary of your training, and it really has strengthened our bond. And I feel a lot less alone just being part of coming to the table, but specifically because of the work that you do. And Allison, tell us about your project.
Well, I'm writing a book that traces my journey, uncovering this history, and then the reparative actions that I'm in the midst of still to repair some of that harm. So I mentioned Gwen's Island. We've told the true story of what happened to the Black community after the Civil War, because they were basically they were threatened with violence and thrown off the island in 1916, but that wasn't the conventional wisdom. And we're working on a historic marker and a number of initiatives. And then the latest thing is that my ancestor, who signed the Declaration of Independence, according to oral history in the Black community, he fathered a son with an enslaved woman whom he then freed. And I was able to find census records for this family, Abram Braxton, as living as a free person of color. And I finally was contacted by one of Abram's descendants because I always wanted to learn more about this story. And of course, it's hard to believe that my ancestor would have only done this once, but this is the story that seems to have survived. And we're trying to use DNA to prove the genetic link. So that's a big story. But in the meantime, we're building people's family trees and listening to their stories. And because some people with the name Braxton who are Black can be descendants of people enslaved by Braxtons, but not carry the DNA. So it has turned in kind of a community Braxton project. And now I have to connect with people in my Braxton line that I've never met because I need their DNA.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's some exciting work. Well, like I said, we can return and have more conversations in the future, but for now, we're going to have to end this. Thank you so much, Marion and Allison, for joining me. And we're going to wrap this up for now. Thanks, LA Progressive, for listening. And we'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.